Hello again, and welcome to part 2 of my coverage of the web horror series, Valle Verde. The second video of the series was highly anticipated, and oh boy did it deliver. In my previous video I was basically just summarizing events. This time around we're going to have a lot more analysis, simply because this second video has so much more to talk about. Before I get started, however, let me reiterate that if you have not seen these two videos yourself, I highly recommend watching them without my commentary for the full experience. It's okay, I can wait, because I'll be paused while you watch those, duh! In the meantime, I want to give a huge shout out to the Valle Verde official Discord. The people there have put a lot of puzzle pieces together that make all this even more intriguing to talk about. Now then, a brief recap of Part 1. Valle Verde is a cancelled video game, and a VHS tape of test footage was discovered buried in a park. Alluvium, who discovered the tape, is now digitizing it and uploading it for us to see. The tape shows footage of the game malfunctioning and generating a lot of strange, oddly religious-themed levels, characters, and items. Previous test players seem to be trapped within the game, along with a potentially malevolent AI, but viewers only know so much at this time. Let us now see where Part 2 will take us. We pick up where we left off, though the player is now in the center of town with everything back to normal, and the player's wallet is now at 0. The player opens the map, and we see icons showing where the NPCs are. Foxo is in his office, Ito is at the museum, and Isaac is running around in the forest in the back? What's he doing there? If I'm not mistaken, that's where the checkerboard field is, as you have to squeeze between two buildings to get back there. You can also see that the clock is stuck on 2:15 with the seconds hand going berserk. At any rate, the player is more concerned with their inventory. It contains an umbrella, a mysterious present from a one Lydia, which I think might be an in-game quest item, I don't really know for sure, and the Divine Mercy received in the previous video. We cut to the player presenting it to Uriel, who transforms into a small gate. The player tries to enter, but rather comically, he's too big and softlocks. Yeah, imagine not getting into heaven because your head was too big for the door. But then it's easier for a camel to thread a needle than it is for a rich man to enter heaven, as the book would say. We next see the player enter the checkerboard area. Interesting how it's raining at first until they enter. We now see 3 statues moving around like chess pieces. The pieces resemble a donkey, a panda, and perhaps a bull? One covers its eyes, one covers its ears, and one covers its mouth. A reference to the 3 wise monkeys, which are a visual metaphor of sorts for those who turn a blind eye to wrongdoing. That is to say, they see no evil, hear no evil, and speak no evil, lest they acknowledge it instead of blissfully ignoring it. Meanwhile, they're being manipulated like pieces on a game board. The player then re-enters the Wasteland area. They open the map and view the surroundings. We can see the clock is now completely wild. Interestingly, the investigator seems to have edited notes into the footage. Each area of the wasteland is labeled with a code word. These code words are used by pilots when they want to make sure radio interference doesn't cause confusion when sending a message. So, here we have Alpha, Juliet, Charlie, Oscar, and Kilo, or A, J, C, O, and K. Interestingly, except for the A, those are the first letters in the names of the children, respectively Jansug, Chloe, Oliver, and Kazuya. The A is the odd one out, but we later learn the area the player is in is called Alamo, which is an interesting name in its own right, but let's set that aside for now. So, a huge observation was recently made about the various zones. Take a look at the Oscar zone first. It's blue-purplish and seems to border with a red area. These colors are shared with a glitched Oliver portrait in Part 1, as well as the Onyxware logo. Then there's the Kilo zone, very whitish like Kazuya's house, and Kazuya's portrait was completely monochrome. The Charlie zone's color also somewhat matches Chloe's house and portrait, but the Juliet zone is completely dark. Hold on to that thought for now. Also, Matthias is the only child without an associated zone. I didn't mention it until now, but there's a theory going around that Matthias and Alluvium himself are the same person in-universe. I don't think it's likely myself, but I felt I should mention it because Alluvium starts with an A, so, you know. The player then uses a debug tool to freely manipulate the camera. As they look around, we see a freaky monster with an even freakier face fly by. The player follows it and discovers something disturbing. Debug data is displayed, showing the location names, something involving neural data, plasticity, and we can also see several percentages. It's not known for certain what these are, but P2 is at 98%. If that's referring to patient O2, as in Matthias, then that's bad news for the others, although P5 is also shown as idle here, which is also pretty interesting. We're then shown a close-up of the figure on the ground. It appears to be a model of a gold angel being eaten by some kind of blocky, maggot-like creature. The model details are displayed, and we see the model is named Omnio. Its origin is shown as angelquestdemo.bin, which comes up later, so we'll get back to that. Shortly after, the same creature that attacked the player in the previous video strikes again, giving the same game over screen, though we can see it much better. Whatever it is, it seems to be aiming to keep the player out of this area. Still no solid info on what this date means, but it has been noted that the Hale-Bopp comet passed over Earth on this day, and that was prophesized to be a sign that Earth would collide with a planetoid. I think we'll know for sure eventually though, as the final timestamp for Part 2 is dated March 14th. That's 1 week before the date that has been alluded to twice. Part 3 will no doubt be very revealing. We're next shown an art museum which contains many weird paintings. Our curator here says he can create duplicates of any painting for us in 3 days for the price of 30 coins, and strongly recommends one in particular. The artist is referred to as some string of random numbers and letters that I don't think has any real meaning, but you never know. Using a special input prompt, the player asks to examine the painting further, and a red text box complies with the request. We're then treated to a horrifying scene of a woman being stabbed over and over, clearly as part of an eternal punishment, with text describing it. The text is in whatever language you're watching it in, with no subtitles. This is apparently unimportant and purely an aesthetic decision. Very freaky either way. By the way, I want to make a note about the documented anomalies and the timestamps shown. It's true that the tape shows all anomalies in chronological order, but from here on out we have several gaps of a week or more between each anomaly. This could mean that either the testers are busy with other stuff or they need time to recuperate from what they're seeing. If I didn't know this was unfiction, I would certainly be freaked out myself. Anyways, moving on. Next we cut back to the church entrance. The player uses a debug tool to shrink down to 42% size, which is the answer to the ultimate question of life, the universe, and everything. Okay, I'm kidding. At any rate, the player enters and the priest invites them inside. Now, this is odd. We have an orange text box and Pietro here has a flame over his head. This could represent the Holy Spirit speaking through Pietro, which only adds to the questions we have, and that list only grows bigger as Pietro asks the player not to record whatever he wants to show them, and then calls the player Pablo, as in one of the investigators named at the start of the tape. Somehow the NPC knows Pablo's real name. What? At any rate, Pablo complies, the tape cutting shortly after a green text box reads, "Peace be with you," and the speaker's name being "This is the truth" when translated. The portrait almost looks somewhat like the Divine Mercy painting. What in the world does this mean? Well, after Pablo returns from whatever that was, we next see Pietro discussing someone. I'm not sure who. It could be that there is another trapped player or benevolent AI trying to correct what's gone wrong. We already have an AI speaking through NPCs with red text boxes, so maybe this is kind of the same thing. Next, Pietro gives Pablo a pair of compasses. That's a compass? Okay. Pablo goes to give it to Matthias right away. It causes Matthias to glow white and fly away. So did that free him? I sure hope it did, but if so, I wonder why there's a second compass for Pablo, or what exactly they do beyond what's implied here. This next section is rather enlightening. The player opens a debug warp menu. We see a list that includes Debug Shima and 3 towns: Forest Town, Ocean Town, and Mountain Town, when translated of course. Debug Shima is selected, and among the area names, one area flashes in various colors. The player tries to select it, but the cursor seems to bounce off of it. With quick reflexes, the player selects it and warps to a dark field with many weird-looking cubes with a brain icon on them. We saw these cubes back when Omniel was getting eaten by those bugs, and Alluvium has also posted the model for the bugs. They had this icon on them too. Wandering the field, the player eventually encounters an image of a strange man. Fun fact, this image is actually part of the artwork for a music album. The player interacts with this entity. The red text box flashes on screen as the entity speaks, but he doesn't seem to understand English. This seems to indicate that Robert is speaking here rather than Pablo, as after a brief pause, the conversation continues with Pablo introducing himself. Robert probably doesn't speak Spanish all that well. The entity introduces himself as Not, and Pablo first tries asking about the smiling one. Not seems to dodge the question, however. The red text box makes me think it's him speaking whenever it appears, so it's possible that he is the smiling one, but there's still the possibility of multiple AI or other entities with that moniker. Either way, he knows that agents are watching him. He may have heard Matthias mentioning the agents, and his vast library of historical knowledge makes it easy for him to conclude what that word could mean. Viewers aren't really sure, however. Not isn't sure exactly what he is, and seems less malevolent and more terrified of what's going on with the game. When the children started screaming for help, he didn't know what to do, and it eventually became so bad that he disabled his ability to understand their languages. Interesting how the one language he kept installed is also Matthias' native language and the language chosen in Part 1. Not next states that this location is north of Forest Town, perhaps well outside the area's skybox.
Y si no lo hice lo suficientemente claro, no quiero ser encontrado. Porque intentaron hacerme sujeto de ceremonia, al igual que todos esos muchachos.
Oh God. Based on previous symbolism, that could mean it was some kind of ritualistic sacrifice. If Not's the one generating all the strange scenes and images, he might be trying to convey this without revealing himself. He says that he saw the developers watching as if nothing happened, which could be what the chess pieces in an earlier scene meant. Not describes his earliest memory as the touch of a soft fabric hooking one of my vertices. Could he be an AI of the TH brain? Admittedly, I'm still speculating, as there's still so many unanswered questions, but unfortunately, Not seems uncomfortable and does not continue the conversation. We cut to the player entering a library. Now, this is curious. The library contains an archive of books, movies, music, and games, some of which are generated by AI. An NPC lists off some locations with such archives, and apparently Ocean Town's file generation is handled by Lydia? Okay, now I'm curious who this Lydia is. Lydia was the name of a woman in the Bible where it's mentioned she sells purple dye, and purple is Foxo's fur color? I think I'm reading too deeply here. There's not enough info to say much about Lydia, so we'll have to move on for now. The player asks to look at the file archive and views a list of games. Now, there is a mountain of info to go over, so let's take it slow. The list of games includes real released games and some fictional games. First up on the list is Civilization, which is of course real. Each game also displays the most recent person to play it, and for Civilization it's Foxo? What? I thought Foxo was just an NPC. How would he play this? I guess maybe the smiling one or some other AI controlled him and played the game through him, but why would they need to do that? And he was playing a game in which the player runs their own empire and conquers everything around them? Oh, it gets even better, because the next game is Angel Quest. Now, this is a bombshell. First of all, remember that angel model that the bugs ate? Its origin was said to be AngelQuestDemo.bin, an asset from an entirely different game wound up in Valle Verde. It was also last played by Oliver. This is important because the artwork here has the same color scheme as both the Oscar Zone and the glitched Oliver portrait in Part 1. Come to think of it, I wonder what happens if you invert the colors on the portrait. Oh, you get that. Well, what's even crazier is that Angel Quest is real. It was cancelled, but Unseen64.net has a page about it. This means that the author, Alluvium, saw that page and recreated the model from the one screenshot of the angel character. Alluvium, stop! You're out of control with your awesomeness! Anyway, moving down the list, next is Circuit Beat, which is real, last played by Kazuya, and the art here is a light color, like the Kilo Zone. Next is Hexacom, which is not real, but notice that it and Angel Quest are TH Brain compatible. So there were other games that worked with this device. And what's more, there's just a dash where the player name would normally be, meaning that Hexacom is the only game on this list to not have been played by anyone. Meanwhile, the only child we haven't seen playing anything here is Jonsug, and the Juliet Zone is completely blank. I think I'm noticing a theme here. Next is Kyoru-chan, which is real, but take a good look at the character. Doesn't it seem familiar? If you don't remember, take a look at who last played this game. Didn't we see this character in part 1 in Matthias's room in his house? Not to boast, but I was the first one to notice this. Okay, next game. Tomb Raider is obviously real, and it was last played by Chloe, and the artwork's color scheme matches the color of the Charlie Zone. Cybersled is real too, but you might be curious about the freaky box art. That's the US box art. No wonder that game didn't sell. And finally, we come to Tharsus, which is selected by the player. The last person to view both this and Cybersled was Kazuya from Japan, and that could potentially be relevant. I should note that Tharsus is not a real game, but this section of the video has such high production value that many viewers thought that it was real. According to Alluvium, this video series uses assets from some of his previously scrapped work. Good to see such fine work get utilized, finally. So, Tharsus was apparently developed by Capcom, which makes sense as Tharsus definitely resembles their Resident Evil series, mixed in with some elements of Neon Genesis Evangelion. The player starts a new game, and we finally have a visual on what the TH brain might look like. Seems to be a keyboard with a brain shape. Next is the character selection. The player can choose between Virgil and Eva, the latter being the player's selection. Virgil and Eva, these are names of religious origin yet again, Virgil being from the Divine Comedy and Eva being a form of the name Eve. Do I have to explain that one? The opening cutscene starts. We don't have a lot of context for the story of Tharsus, but it seems something has broken into some facility of some kind and is causing a lot of trouble. Mid-cutscene, the visuals switch to 3D models. I speculate this is where the intro switches to the perspective of the chosen character, Eva in this case. Eva heads off to check on Virgil while images flash in the background. Strangely, in the subtitled video, the English subtitles look like they're from the game itself. These do not appear in the unsubtitled Spanish version, but it could be just aesthetic yet again. As soon as the gameplay starts, the game reports a connection problem with the TH brain. This screen confirms that the icon on the cubes from Knott's room is a logo for the TH brain. Though, is the TH brain a wireless device? I mean, I can't imagine connection problems arising from a wired device, but I guess it's possible. But we don't have much time to dwell on it, as something washes over the screen and drastically alters the area, and we can also hear the sounds of singing and a Geiger counter. Eva exits the corridor and arrives somewhere else? Astoundingly, Eva seems to have entered the Alamo area in Valle Verde. I mean, it looks similar, so it's highly probable that this is either Alamo, or more specifically, the Kilo Zone. The first thing Eva sees is a sign with Japanese. According to commenters, this reads, Sodom, Gomorrah, no, just men playing God. This of course refers to two cities destroyed by God for the evil within them. And this area is called Alamo, perhaps referring to Los Alamos, where the Manhattan Project took place. That project led to the destruction of two Japanese cities by the atomic bomb, and we also have a torii gate, which you see in Japan near shrines. All of this is hinting at an obvious theme, but we're still largely in the dark as to how and why this imagery has appeared here. As Eva sweeps the area, her gun briefly locks onto something in the distance. Whatever it is, it has just under 4.3 billion HP. That's the maximum value of a 32-bit integer. What is that, a Square Enix super boss? Eva spots something in the distance and investigates. Two robot-like creatures are lying destroyed among the wreckage, perhaps as a nod to the mythical guardians of Jigoku, Gozu and Meizu. These creatures are interesting though because their designs seem to draw from Isaac the robot, or is it the other way around? Is Isaac a new version of these? And if I'm correct in my theory that Isaac was wandering around the entrance to Alamo, could it be that the robots are created and sent here for some reason? Maybe to fight something? Or gather data? Or I could be totally off? Eva moves forward and sees more disturbing figures, including what appears to be a baby hanging from a statue as though it were being sacrificed. The camera then suddenly shifts to the baby's perspective as a monstrous-looking golden bull suddenly arrives and spawns one of the bugs we saw earlier, dropping it onto Eva. She only has moments to struggle in a QuickTime event before she is killed, or should I say deleted, consumed even, turned into an Eva sandwich. The game crashes with an error message. This is base64 encryption, and when decrypted it says, "There can be no peace in the world." in English. Remember, the game has been in Spanish for most of this, so some messages and content being in English is something to take note of. The player returns to Matthias's house and inspects more of the drawings. As he does so, the TV turns on suddenly. It shows a TV broadcast featuring the Bishop Fulton Sheen, who I mentioned in the previous video. In fact, Pietro looks a whole lot like him. Sheen had his own inspirational TV series in the 50s, though I don't think what we see here is an actual episode. It feels too much like a Doomsday Cult video, and the animation is too good for the 50s. Sheen talks about the chaos of man and how it invites intervention by God. After the sequence, the Patreon credits roll, showing a list of names for each tier. Two of the tiers are interesting. The Uriel gear confirms the name of the angel I mentioned, and the Oscar gear. This could mean Oliver is going to be important going forward. So, that was a lot. As I said, Part 2 has an incredible amount to consider. We are still missing the answers to a lot of questions, and new ones have definitely popped up. But one thing we're definitely meant to take notice of is that game assets and other media are bleeding from that archive the library has into Valle Verde, and then the bugs spawned by the Golden Bull consume them. We do not yet know the bull's purpose, but it has something to do with the TH brain. The bugs it spawns have the device's logo printed on their bodies. The bull could be our demonic antagonist. Let's also reflect on everything we learned from Knot. His dialogue is actually voiced, but it comes with a red text box and gear theorized to indicate AI-generated content. This could indicate Knot is the smiling one and generated all the imagery that seems to be harshly judgmental of man, potentially drawing from topics he overheard the children talking about, like if he was listening to Kazuya talk about the atomic bomb, or if he listened to Matthias talk about his own confusion regarding man's relationship with God. This is all speculation, but I'm definitely seeing potential links between the children and the imagery hinting at a connection to them. Knot might not be the only AI here either, because Pietro, besides resembling Fulton Sheen himself, seems self-aware and has an entirely different color for his dialogue boxes. There are still many unanswered questions. Such as, what is the true purpose of the game itself? The children are stuck inside, perhaps sealed by whatever ceremony Knot alluded to. There's also a library full of music, movies, and games that the children can view or play. My gut instinct is to say Valle Verde is meant to be a digital paradise you can live in forever, and if you ever run out of content to enjoy, the AI can always generate more on its own. It would have plenty of data to train itself on, after all. But I don't know, that seems like it was too easy to figure that out. The imagery related to child sacrifice implies the game could be a literal altar for sacrifices, and the bull that spawns the bugs is eating away at whatever food is put before it, hence the children being invisible in Part 1 because their polygons were eaten. Whatever the inciting incident for all of this was also remains a mystery. The good news is there's still one part of the tape left, and there may be even more content to come. You can be certain I'll cover that when it happens. For now, I hope you've enjoyed my coverage of Valle Verde, and we'll be back to this when Part 3 releases in the future. Thank you all for watching, and have a nice Halloween, everyone!